Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Father TED Talks. Today, I wanted to answer a question about the holy canons of the church. So, what are the holy canons of the church? Because a lot of people ask the question, and also a lot of people, especially online, tend to throw the canons around very, very liberally, right? Like you'll hear people get into arguments in the Orthodox Church about, different topics, whether they be ecclesiastical topics, they be moral topics, and a lot of times, a lot of lay people, not so much priests or theologians, but more lay people will say, well, the canons of the church say this, or the canons of the church say that, or we're forbidden from doing this, or this is the punishment for this. And, people throw around a lot of heavy words without kind of even understanding what they're saying. So I just want to clarify, what are the canons of the church? Where do they come from, and how are they supposed to be used properly, right? So number one, this is the pidalion. The pidalion it's a Greek word, and it basically means the rudder of a ship, the thing in the back that kind of steers the ship, right? As the engine goes or as the wind pushes, right? The rudder controls which way the ship is going to go, right? So the pidalion means the rudder. And this book here, which is a Greek one, which is called the pidalion, is the Greek jurisdiction's version of the compilation of all the holy canons that we have from the history of the church. Now, what are canons? Canons are not, when I say canons, I don't mean canons like boom, like, the cannons that shoot cannonballs, but rather the canons are rules. Greek kanona. Kanona means it is a rule, right? A rule by which we live, right? Or, a statement about truth, right? So a canon is a rule, but it's not a rule like, like in the law, as we understand it today, where, the law says don't cross the street here, and you cross and then you got to pay a penalty. This is not the way the canons work. But rather, the canons come from three different main sources in the history of the church. Number one is we have canons that come from, let's start from the ones that have the least amount of authority. We have individual canons that come from individual different saints, and these are basically like the opinions of individual saints of the church, and they may write down certain guidelines and certain rules that they think are appropriate for the church, or that maybe they think they're appropriate for their local church at the time and historical context in which they lived. And so these are kind of like the personal opinion of individuals. Then after that level of kind of individual canons of saints, you have canons of local, what we call local synods or local councils. So these are kind of councils that happen, but in only one specific place. So for example, in the ancient times, you could have a council in Alexandria, Egypt, or you could have a council in Antioch, or you can have a council, in Rome, like a local council to deal with local problems of that geographic region, right? And those problems may be, theological, they may be pastoral, which is like, fasting rules or something, or excommunication rules, things like that. But these are local councils dealing with local problems of a specific area. And then after that level, you have what is called the ecumenical councils, right? So ecumenical means universal. These are the councils that encompass the whole church, right? And of course, in the Orthodox tradition, we have 7 ecumenical councils that have happened in the history of the church. And they are only called when there is such a big problem that it affects the whole church, universal. And representatives, bishops come from all over the known world to one place to be able to discuss those specific issues. And a lot of times the fruits of those discussions and the fruits of those, that enlightenment that comes from all these holy men coming together is that they write down canons, which are the rules and the decrees of that specific council. So again, just as a quick recap, you have the canons or the rules written by individual saints. Those have the least amount of authority. Then you have the second level, which is local councils and the canons that come from there. And then you have the canons that come from ecumenical council, which have the greatest amount of authority because they are universal and they apply to the whole church. This book, the Pidalion, contains all of those different canons. It has the local, has the individuals, and it also has the ecumenical, right? And it even has some earlier canons like the canons of the apostles, which are very, very early on canons written by the apostolic community in Jerusalem. So we have this like a compilation of all those different canons that was compiled by Saint Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, approximately 250 to 300 years ago. And it is just a compilation. The Russian Orthodox Church has its own compilation. The Serbian Orthodox Church has its own compilation. They all have kind of like, because they also have local synods that we don't have. that they've added to their compilations. But this is the one that the Greeks have. So this is a compilation. So when you have a book like this, which is a compilation of all these different canons from all these different kind of sources, it can be a little deceiving, because you look at this book and you say, oh, let me open the book and let me read a canon, and all the canons don't have the same weight, and all the canons don't have the same authority, and all the canons are not written at the same time in the historical period, and they are written at different times in different places for different situations. So a lot of times people will pick up a book like this without kind of understanding the historical context, without understanding where they come from, and they'll read it as if it's one book that was written in one time and place, and that all the canons are the same, and they all kind of refer to all the same situations, but they don't. That's number one. Number two is that there are two types of canons really within the Pidalion, within the rudder. And I would say that when we separate those canons, you could say that there are those canons that are dogmatic. Dogmatic means that they are talking about the kind of the theological truths of our faith. For example, a canon will say, we decree that Christ is both man and God, the two natures of Christ, right? That is a dogmatic canon. That is eternal. That does not change. That is not kind of up for interpretation. It is stating a dogmatic truth about our faith, right? So that's a dogmatic canon. But then you also have what are called, for example, regulatory canons. And those are canons that kind of govern the everyday workings of the church, right? So for example, canons about fasting, which are not dogmatic. So you'll have different canons at different eras in even different local synods that kind of have slightly different fasting rules depending on the place and the historical context and things like that. It's not the same across the board. And so those change over time depending on the pastoral needs of the church, right? So those are regulatory canons, like how do you govern this? How do you govern marriage? How do you govern divorce? How do you govern all these type of different kind of issues that pop up? Those are regulatory canons. And so we don't want to confuse the dogmatic canons, which are eternal and they don't change, right? And they state eternal truths. And then you have the regulatory canons, right? And so saying all that, kind of giving all those, that little bit of a history, is to basically say that the canons of the church are tools of the church, not of the lay people. And what do I mean by that? That they are there as guides, and they are there to keep the church on track. They are not there as a punishment. They're not there to hit people over the head with, to punish them when we think they've done something wrong, or we think that they are in the wrong, and we think that they need to be excommunicated, or they need to be punished by the church. This is not the way the church uses the canons. The church has always used the canons in a medicinal way. We've always said that the church is a hospital, and it is there to apply medication to help heal people. And the canons are there to help guide people towards Christ, not to guide people away from Christ, not to kick them out of the church. And a lot of times in our modern society, where we live under kind of the modern rule of law, we see law in the West as punitive, right? You break the law, you pay the penalty. But the canons of the church are not about that. The canons of the church are meant to be applied by the bishops and by the priests, right? In a medicinal and in a pastoral way to help people. And this is why, not counting the dogmatic canons, which do not change, but the regulatory canons, how do you apply excommunication, or how do you apply fasting rules, or how do you apply different kind of pastoral canons? It is up to the discretion of the bishops and the priests to apply or not apply, or to kind of apply in certain ways that are going to lead people according to their strength and their spiritual level, are going to lead them towards salvation, towards healing, right? And so the canons and the rudder is a book and a tool of the church, just like medical journals and medical textbooks are the tools of the doctors. They are not tools of the people who are sick. They are tools of those who are trained to be doctors, to diagnose and to prescribe medications, right? So a layperson is not supposed to be diagnosing themselves, is not supposed to be prescribing medication themselves. We go to the doctor for the diagnosis, we go to the doctor for the prescription, then we go to the pharmacist to fulfill that prescription, and so on, right? And so this is kind of like a medical journal for the spiritual doctors, right? And it is meant for them. It doesn't mean that lay people cannot read it, but we have to be really, really careful when we open up books like this that are very complex, and they span 2,000 years of holy tradition, and we try to kind of like use the canons and wield the canons against our opponents, or against people we don't like, or against people that we think deserve what we think they deserve. That is not the spirit of the canons. That is not the way that we use the canons in the church, and we should be very, very careful about that. So I just want to clarify that we have to understand what this book is, who's supposed to be using it, and what is the purpose of the canons, right? It's always there to bring people towards Christ, and it is not a tool of any person. It is a tool of the hierarchy who have been put in the position to be able to exercise the use of those canons when it is permitted and when it is appropriate. So again, just a clarification on what the Pidalion, the rudder is, what the holy canons are, and what their place is in the Orthodox Church. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at Fr.TEDTalks@gmail.com. Till next time, take care and God bless.